You're listening to the Mind Over Finger podcast, episode number 43.
Welcome to the Mind Over Finger podcast, discussions on mindful music making, efficient practice, and building a purposeful career. And now, your host, Dr. Renee Paul Gauthier.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the podcast. Today, I speak with oboist Frank Rosenwein. Frank has been principal oboe of the Cleveland Orchestra since 2005. He made his solo debut with the orchestra in February 2007, and since then, he's performed many times as soloist with the Cleveland Orchestra and several ensembles throughout the U.S. Since 2006, Frank has served as head of the oboe department at the Cleveland Institute of Music. He also teaches at the Kent Blossom Music Festival, and he's in demand as a guest artist and masterclass clinician in schools all over the world. An avid chamber musician, he spent many summers at the Marlborough Festival and has performed in several chamber music festivals across the country. Born in Evanston, Illinois, Frank holds a Bachelor of Music degree from the Cleveland Institute of Music and a Master of Music degree from the Juilliard School. Prior to coming to Cleveland, he served as principal oboe of the San Diego Symphony and San Diego Opera. In this episode, we discuss stepping into the role of principal in the major orchestra, transitioning from student to professional life, how to keep playing at the highest level consistently, the importance of having a strong vision and cultivating an ever-inquisitive mind, what teaching brings to one's playing, and much more. There's a ton of great insight in this conversation, and I hope you enjoy. Let's go to the show. Frank Rosenwein, thank you so much for being with us today.
It's a real pleasure to be with you. Thanks so much for having me.
Frank, you and I met years ago at Music Academy of the West in Santa Barbara, and already then you were a rock star. And it's been so great to keep track of your career, not only as a performer, but also as a teacher. So I'd love to begin with your musical journey and for the listeners to hear about how you got to where you are today.
Well, I grew up in Chicago, in Evanston, right near Northwestern, which was kind of a hotbed. It still is of musical activity, and on a really high level. So I was able to study with really great teachers. My first teacher was Robert Morgan of the Lyric Opera, and I got to play in all kinds of great ensembles, like the Chicago Youth Symphony and Midwest. And some other Midwest orchestras, and I was really fortunate that my parents were big classical music lovers, big into the scene. We went to all kinds of concerts all the time. They played music themselves, so music was always a big part of my life, and I always really enjoyed it. I always really found meaning in it. I played piano, which uh, was fun, but never a real vocation for me. Never was gonna be anything I was gonna be great at. But oboe felt like the right thing for me. I started on clarinet early on, maybe eighth. Yeah, I want to say not eighth grade, fourth grade, and then oboe I started around fifth grade. Um, and it was, I wouldn't say it was love at first sight, because I remember a lot of frustration and with the reeds and you rent an oboe, and it's kind of a terrible thing. It's like it doesn't work, and none of the keys are sticking, and so actually I think a lot of oboist problems kind of stem from this sort of initial contact with the oboe, which is so frustrating and horrible. I mean, you can barely get a sound out of this thing, so then you have to compensate in all kinds of different ways, and it sort of develops all these bad habits. But anyway, got through that and was able to really start enjoying it, and then I ended up at the Institute of Music, Cleveland Institute of Music, where I'm now teaching, which is a real real blessing, a real trip also. Um, and I studied with the late great John Mack. That was a tremendous influence on me. And then I went to Juilliard, where I studied with Alain Duvas, who was equally as impactful on my life and on my playing and my overall philosophy. And then I was in San Diego for 3 years. San Diego Symphony. They were they were gracious enough to take, I wouldn't say take pity on me, but they were able to they were very nice in taking a young, sort of inexperienced, really green person and showing me the ropes and how to do things and figuring things out. And then I came to Cleveland in 2005.
Hmm. And that's really important what you're talking about, because that's actually one thing I wanted to talk to you about is being the principal oboe of an orchestra. It's already, it's a big responsibility no matter where you are, but at the moment you're the principal oboe of one of the most important orchestras in the US. The Cleveland Orchestra is what we musicians call the Big Five. And it's really true how, you step into a role like this. I imagine a pretty steep learning curve, right?
It is. It absolutely is. I remember thinking my first year, that there was the part of the daunting quality of it was the consistency, the need to be consistently great throughout not only the performances, of which there were maybe, I mean, which there are sometimes 4 a week. We don't usually do 5. Some orchestras do 5 performances a week, but we usually do either 3 or 4. But being consistently great through those, and but then also showing up to rehearsal, and not having that quality be any different than what you would want the performances to be. So in that respect, it was a really difficult, and sort of mind altering kind of transition. Um, so yeah, I would have to say in that respect, and then also in terms of just getting the rep under your fingers. You know what I mean? That you
Mm.
just go through so much, so many pieces. And quickly, so you got to get these things up to speed. You got to know what you're doing. You got to have a vision for what you're after, even if you've never played the thing.
Right. That's usually one of the biggest thing you mentioned, transition for people going from school to professional life is in school. I mean, I know for a fact because I've seen you in action that you were principal oboe before you got your first principal oboe job, but it's what exactly what you're mentioning, the fact that it's week after week, sometimes several programs a week, new repertoire all the time. It's not something we experience in school the same way that we experience in the professional life.
Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. And usually, I think with most things professionally, you just have far fewer rehearsal hours to get things together, whether it's the orchestra world or chamber music, or a recital that you're putting on in school. It feels like, yeah, you have the time. You can devote a certain percentage of time to really uncovering these things and discovering them. But then it feels like the real world just goes way too quick. I mean, it's almost. I mean, of course, you have lots of things going on. People have kids and they have lives, and you got to take care of the flooding in your basement and so on and so. So I mean, things get complicated in terms of just regular life. But I do. I think many of us in who have gone on into the profession, feel a little bit nostalgic for the days of, let's uncover this piece and let's figure it out, and let's really learn it from the inside and discover its potential. But you do have to do that in a kind of condensed time frame. So I think it's easy actually for professionals to kind of feel like, oh, we'll just churn it out, just crank the next one. What's the next piece? Okay, got it. I'm gonna play. And I think you have to come to it with the same kind of freshness, the same kind of um, wide-eyed sense of wonderment about these magnificent pieces. Well, what more can we do with it?
And do you mind going into more of the specifics of what it's like to be the principal oboe of, a big orchestra like the Cleveland Orchestra? You mentioned having to juggle many things as, maybe a parent, a teacher, all of these things that we have to do. You guys have to make reeds.
Indeed, indeed, and that becomes a huge factor in the consistency, right? So for oboists, the notion of consistency really does have to do with how well you can get a hang out of making reads at a high level, or if you can't, then how do you compensate via your own abilities to sort of cover the fact that the reads aren't great. And of course, that is part of it. You can only, I mean, a reed it has its own mind. It wants to do its own thing, and so to a certain extent, a lot of it is mind over matter. But that would be equipment stuff that goes beyond oboe, right? Everyone has their own certain equipment issues, and so mind over matter, right? Like overcoming, just saying to yourself, look, there may be flaws in what I have here, in terms of my setup, but the music has to speak through me anyway. So pushing through in that way, I think, is important in terms of the consistency. And also, I mean, I really think that the most important thing is to, or maybe there's two most important things. I mean, one is to take it really seriously. That is to say, this is, to play music on the highest level is the absolute goal. Is there's can be no exception to that. But on the other hand, or maybe in addition, um, that these pieces are, that it's not about sort of grinding it out and making sure that that you succeed, or that you somehow have, like, you've done what you're supposed to do. It's about making these pieces come alive. It's about telling their stories. So keeping a mind, as to keeping you in your mind, as you're going through the repertoire day in and day out, what are the stories, what are the expressions, what are the feelings that we're trying to evoke here.
Right. Like earlier, you mentioned vision. How do you go about finding this balance between your personal vision and your conductor's vision of a passage or a piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think in a way this has to do with, I think one can prepare for this kind of thing, um, one's whole life. That is to say, I think that, of course, the conductor is in a position of authority, and of course, you want to follow his or her direction. Um, and but at the same time, your own sense of what you're doing and why you're doing it is crucial. So I think if you can establish that, I always think, when you're studying with a teacher, um, the best way to approach it is to feel like that teacher is going to help you, with your vision and furthering your you-ness. And of course, you're going to take as much as you possibly can of that person, but to have in reserve a certain element of skepticism
Mm.
towards what is being tossed your way. And skepticism, I mean, by really, I guess I mean, a certain, working through of what you're being told, not accepting just on the basis of the fact that this person is a great teacher, or is a great person, or is a great musician, but that you're really sort of working through whether that is a true thing for you as well. So I think if you can, while going through school and while being in the world, um, be open and totally, accepting of new ideas, and at the same time having that certain, questioning spirit.
Mhm.
I think that really does, in the end, that's the sort of relationship that you want to have with the conductor.
Absolutely. One of the thing I try to teach to my students in the model that I use is what I call beginner's mind, and it's exactly what you're talking about. It's this idea that at all times you want to have this beginner's approach. So beginners are usually very enthusiastic. They want to know more. They want to find out more about whatever thing they're passionate about. And oftentimes it's easy to just go home and try to execute exactly what the teacher told us and become very passive in the vision, to use your term. And I think that it's the idea of always asking yourself, what else? Oh, where else could I take this phrase? Or what else could I try? And it's the same in problem solving. I find if you're really struggling with a passage, I find that students oftentimes they'll work up to a certain point in the studio and then just leave it to the next lesson. They'll bring the passage in and say, I don't know how to do this. I always want students to ask themselves, what else could I try? How else could I work on this passage?
Absolutely. In a way, the teacher-student relationship is can be one of sort of hero worship, and it's great in a way, but it also can be dangerous. So I think you're absolutely right. The idea that that the teacher can be this pillar, this guidepost, but our best. Um, I think our sort of best way of giving information or of teaching is to make people empowered to feel like, yeah, I can figure this out.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, you teach at the Cleveland Institute, so it's a good resume you've got going on. What do you feel like teaching brings to you as a performer?
Teaching is just such a tremendous boon to me, um, as a person and as a player. I mean, I almost sometimes think of teaching as it's almost selfish. It's like a selfish endeavor. I mean, people talk about um, passing things down and so forth and so on. And of course, I mean, I love the idea of passing things down, of giving people my perspective and seeing if that's beneficial to them and so on and so on. But it's equally as beneficial to me, in the sense that it forces me really to evaluate at all times, to be super self evaluating, which may be linked to self criticism, but it's a little different in the sense that it of course has to do with sort of working through the idea of what do I hold dear, what are my principles, and also the sort of the critique of it be of myself being, what could I do better, what are the things that that I have neglected in my own playing, and so the idea of sort of teasing these things out, of drawing them from me, um, is super important, and it makes the playing. I think it advances the playing. I mean, it, it's a weird situation to be. It's still a weird situation for me, 20 years out of school, um, to not have a certain, like, you know person to play for, or someone to say, yeah, this is good and this is not so good. I mean, so that's always the kind of the sticking point for what happens to an artist after they leave school. And I think teaching is such a critical component um, of keeping yourself on the right track, on the track of self awareness, of self evaluation, so that you can grow in kind of organic and not crazy ways.
hmm
There's a danger there.
I love that term that you're using, self-evaluating, and I think it takes us back to thinking like a beginner, right? It kind of keeps us in check.
That's it. That's it. That's it. The sense that there's more out there. The sense that it's that you could be doing something different. And and sometimes that can also be that can go too far. I mean, you can go far afield just because you don't have people telling you, no, you've gone too far, you know. But I think if you can always question yourself as to whether this makes sense in terms of your principles, does this make sense in terms of how you want music to go, um, and I think you can you navigate your course.
And I you mentioned all of this that you're saying is first of all so true, but it's making me think, going back to what we were talking about earlier, and you had mentioned consistency and playing at a high level. How does that look like for you on a daily basis? How do you organize your schedule? Again, you're very busy. You have to perform at a high level all the time. For people who are curious, um, how do you organize your time in terms of making sure you have time to practice, time to be rested, time to make reads?
Oof. Well, it all gets a little bit condensed. Um, we and 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 now actually we have two kids, so they're pretty young still. So there's a lot of sort of competing there's a lot of competing interests for time, um, but I think the this certain I guess is going back to a theme of being self-aware, right? What are the things that are most necessary in order to play at the highest level?
Mm.
I think for oboists there's clearly the reed thing. So what are the ways in which we can make the reed thing as efficient as possible and as routine as possible? Like so I do most of my read stuff at night after the kids have gone to bed, and that's my time to sort of to figure all that stuff out. Then once they're up in the morning and sort of off to school, then it's my time to warm up, to get like back into this, to feel like I'm connected to the oboe, connected to music, connected to the breath, connected to sound, all this. And then there's rehearsal. And I think anything can be sort of a laboratory for experimentation and for growth. So I think that a 20-minute warm up is a perfectly legitimate place to really work on things, to get things done. And I think a 2.5 hour rehearsal is also a place um, to gain right,
Hmm.
to gain knowledge from your other colleagues, but to also work on what you need to work on. If I feel like today, my articulation just isn't doing what I'm doing well, I mean, are there articulated passages in this music that I can sort of use as a way to work on what I need to work on? So I think these kinds of things are necessary, right? Like just sort of appreciating each moment as an opportunity.
Mm, that's a great advice. You ready for a round of rapid fire question before I let you go?
Let's do
Oh, good. Frank, what skills do you think young musicians studying today should acquire in addition to learning to play their instruments?
it. I think uh, I think musical true musical
Mm.
principles. I would say learning what's important to you. What are some of the real basic elements of music that need to be there, and how can you sort of take a principled approach to looking at every new piece that comes across your stand.
Excellent. What's a habit that you have that you think has contributed to your success?
I think I think it's a mindset. I think on the one hand, we have to take things extremely seriously, and for yourself and for the music and um, for humanity, these are important things. But we also have to, at the same time, realize that we are not dealing with Middle East peace. We are not dealing with we are not dealing with with sort of nuclear arms. If we make a mistake in a concert, you know, nobody dies, and people are there to enjoy, to be lifted from whatever position they've come there, whatever troubles they've come in with, and so to have a kind of a duality in your mind of of ultimate seriousness, but the sense that this is about joy. Ultimately, this is about beauty.
What doubts or resistance have you had to face on this journey?
Oh, I think the self-doubting is the craziest part. I mean, obviously, we all run into rejection. I mean, I you know, if you look at my career, it looks like, well, things just fell into place, and so you landed in the best place you could possibly land. It's true that I do feel so lucky for where I've ended up, but this was not preordained. I took plenty auditions where I didn't get anywhere, um, and but I think that's even a lesser issue than the self doubt, than the feeling of paralyzation. That, like, well, I was doing this and it didn't work, and now what should I do something totally different? So these are the hard questions, especially in that kind of interim period where you're leaving school and you're just joining the workforce, as it were. So I think the self criticism is the kind of the crucial element which we need to grow, but at the same time we can't let it cripple.
And do you have a way to handle that?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think following your own sense of what is really
Mm.
right is ultimately the path forward. Um, but I had moments of real aha in my journey from, say, San Diego to Cleveland, where it felt like I really figured out how to do this audition thing, and it wasn't so much a kind of total change from what I'd been doing, but like an enhancement of what I'd already been doing. Sometimes people are too um, sometimes what people think they're doing and what is actually coming out are two different things. So maybe reconciling those two things. Am I doing too little? And maybe that's why, too little in terms of expression, too little in terms of range, too little in terms of whatever. Or on the contrary, am I doing too many things? Am I sort of overly layering on top of this music?
You're making me think that we kind of learn about ourselves. It's one way to overcome self-doubt is to learn more about ourselves and then tweak and keep growing.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah, I think that's right.
What's your favorite tool in the practice room?
um, I think my favorite tool is to shake things up. I
Mm.
think in some ways, routine is our enemy, and the more we can think of things to do freshly, um, I think the better off we are in the practice room.
How about a favorite book that you would recommend?
Aha, a music book. I think the best music books, and I have to say I haven't read too many on the sort of the particulars of performance and so forth and so on. But I think the more we can learn about the history of the things that we're playing, the context of them, the better off we are. So I'm reading a Beethoven book by Gene Swafford,
Mm.
and the I think the more we can sort of get our link our playing with the lives of the composers and their and their time period, the better off we are.
And Frank, how about a quick actionable tip that listeners can implement today in their musical lives?
Try to enjoy more than critique.
That's a really good one. You know what? Because it makes us listen in a different way.
Yeah, I mean, that's what the audience is doing, right? I mean, the audience is not there to look at you askance when you do something that they think is. I don't know. There's no one comes to a concert to critique. They're just there for inspiration.
Very good point. What does the 1920 season looks like for you?
Oh, it's great. We have some wonderful concerts. We're doing Berg's Lulu this year, and we're accompanying that with a kind of festival of degenerate art. Degenerate in the sense that it was banned by the Nazis and so forth. So that should be a really interesting little festival. And we do tend to do a lot of opera here in Cleveland, but we've never done Berg, so I'm extremely excited about that.
That sounds fantastic. Frank, thank you so much for being with us today and for sharing your story and your wisdom. And I feel really inspired now to go practice and shake things up.
It was a great pleasure. I'm so happy to have been with you.
Thank you guys so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this chat with Frank Rosenwein. I thought that there was so much great insight in this conversation, and I especially loved his practice room tool, which is to shake things up and use variety as a way to practice better. For me, this is something that I do more and more all the time, and it really has made me enjoy practicing so much more. It keeps it more fun, and because I'm pushing myself to come up with more creative ways to practice, it really makes me absorb the material at a deeper level and helps me, I think, learn it faster. I also love what he mentions earlier in the podcast about continually asking ourselves, what else? My students know that this is one of my favorite questions. It's in the model that I teach, and I think it might be the best way to truly make progress. And it really ties into another point he made, which I think is super important. And it's to keep that balance between being 100% open-minded to the feedback we receive and at the same time keep a certain amount of skepticism. This is so very, very important. We need to receive criticism and feedback with open ears and an open mind, but we really need to internalize it. We need to take it further and really explore what it is for us and how it translates truly in our playing. So not to take it at face value, but to really explore and find our own meaning in this feedback. I think it really helps absorbing what is helpful at a much deeper level, while filtering what could be potentially harmful to our own voice and authenticity. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Frank Rosenwein. If so, please consider spreading the love and sharing the episode with a friend. And if you'd like to take it one step further, please take a minute to head over to iTunes to rate and leave a positive review. It's very much appreciated. As always, you can find the show notes for this episode and more information about my guests and resources on mindful and deliberate practice at mindoverfinger.com. Let's keep the conversation going, so find me on Instagram or Facebook at mindoverfinger, and consider joining the Mind Over Finger tribe at facebook.com/groups/mindoverfingertribe. There you can find inspiration, motivation, and support, and this is where I pop in with live videos with tips and tricks on how to practice, prepare for auditions, and all of that good stuff. Again, thank you, and à bientôt!